This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, today saw that rally in risky assets hitting a wall across markets as excitement over easing restrictions and, of course, monetary and fiscal stimulus packages starts to die down. Though emerging market stocks extended a rally for an eighth straight session today, markets in Europe and Africa did give up some of those early gains. MSCI's index of developing market shares rose 0.4% on the day to hit a fresh three-month high. As, of course, focus now shifts to the U.S. Fed's meeting for any new stimulus plans. South Africa's JSE was lower as investors await a new catalyst, possibly on a Thursday. Now, also coming up on today's show. As Kenya relaxes COVID-19 restrictions, we look at how new rules will transform its transport industry. Hong Kong's flag carrier Cathay Pacific sets aside $5 billion in a bailout plan amid the coronavirus pandemic. And Egyptian coffee shops are turning to fruit and vegetables to keep their businesses afloat. Well, let's kick off tonight's show here in Kenya as the country faces races to contain the spread of the coronavirus. The Kenyan government is now turning its focus to contact tracing through the use of technology in its transport sector. But as CGTN's Robert Nagila now reports, not everyone is in favor of this plan.
They're the backbone of Kenya's public transport sector. Popularly known as matatus, there are more than 47,000 14-seater taxis across Kenya. And now, the government wants to use them to trace contacts of COVID-19 cases through the use of cashless payment apps. A recent public notice by the National Transport Authority says the payment system will also provide a platform for an effective contact tracing application. But not all public transport operators are in favor of cashless payments, as I soon discover on my way to the Central Business District. Once seated, I'm immediately offered sanitizer in line with Ministry of Health guidelines on COVID-19. Cashless payments is a brilliant idea, but it's not without its challenges. It's already in use in the sector, but it's not mandatory. Shukri Ahmed, the taxis conductor, says the current cashless system is not foolproof.
The passenger pays you and later reverses the transaction. There is a day a passenger paid $2 and on alighting the vehicle, he reversed the payment.
For the government, it makes sense. Contact tracing apps use Bluetooth technology to alert smartphone users when in the vicinity of someone exposed to COVID-19. But the $2 billion matatu industry has been deeply affected by COVID-19. Social distancing guidelines mean they can no longer fill their vehicles.
It has affected us a lot. We now carry 8 passengers instead of 14.
Hanging on the taxi's door, Shukri's attempts to attract passengers bear no fruit. As I pay for my ride using a mobile money app, I inquire from Shukri why they prefer cash.
The policeman wants a share. Touts have to be paid, so cashless will be difficult.
Cash, they say, is king. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, let's delve further into the impact the pandemic has had on Kenya's public transport sector. We're now joined by Simon Kimutai. He's the chairman of the Matatu Owners Association. And of course, Matatus are public service vehicles here in Kenya. Great to have you on the show with us, Mr. Kimutai. Now, of course, the public transport sector here in Kenya is now basically on its knees, of course, as a result of the pandemic. It has been reported that the sector is losing almost $8 million daily. Paint us a picture of the impact this pandemic has had on public transport.
Well, thank you very much. Public transport is a mode of transport that is used by over 90% of Kenyans to travel from one destination to the other. And since the advice of staying at home, the business were affected, then followed by the curfews that came in, and eventually the reduction of the capacity where a vehicle had to reduce its passengers by 50%. So it's been hit so hard that it's making losses big time. And now we don't see ourselves getting anywhere. We are eating into our capital because the revenues have dwindled by over 50 to 60%. So the business has really gone down, and in Nairobi, for instance, is the capital city where most people use it to transact their businesses. Nairobi is under lockdown, and there are no vehicles moving from one county to Nairobi. So, and on a daily basis, we have hundreds of thousands of people moving to transact businesses between their various counties and Nairobi. Nairobi is a center where most business is conducted, and a main supplier of goods and wares, where people would travel to Nairobi and transact and take the goods to do their business in whatever places they've come from. So in general, the business has been affected so hard that some vehicles have had to be parked because there are no passengers to be carried.
Now, back in May, the government did put forward an economic stimulus package, which it said would help resuscitate key sectors of the country's economy, including an almost $28 million SME credit guarantee scheme. Will the transport sector, specifically the public transport sector, benefit from this? What do you expect?
Well, I think there's just been a talk, and nothing has come forth. Neither have we been, contacted as representative of public transport investors on the same. So we are left alone to ban, and I don't know when normalcy comes back, we will be able to get back to where we were. But we don't see that because we are told that COVID-19 is here to stay with us. So it shows that we have to maintain the social distance, and which, of course, has hit the industry by 50% of its capacity. So this directly impacts on revenues, which fares collected from passengers. And that also, right now, people are living in fear. They don't travel a lot. Nairobi now is only people who go to work, not those who go to transact businesses, because Nairobi is under lockdown. So people who go to work, it's morning, maybe 6 to 8 o'clock, maximum 9, and there are no more people traveling. And then from 5 o'clock, when people come out of work. So in the day where we used to rely on SME, small business, people who are transacting, maybe hawkers who want to sell their wares in other parts of the city, were doing that. But since there is the fear, and at the same time, low business doing, most people lost their jobs, and people who are looking for jobs are no longer there. People who are doing manual jobs are no longer there. So you find that movements have been restricted to either only people who are going to work. So this has impacted, despite greatly, adding insult to injury, because earlier on it was reduction of passengers. Now people don't move a lot in the day, and those are people whom we rely, especially in Nairobi. Now people who are traveling from up country, they can't come to Nairobi. Nairobi is the center, and this is where most businesses are transacted. And you'll find that this has affected all public transport in the country because of the fear and the advice that have been put in place of minimizing movements and social distancing.
Right. Right. Now, in addition to passenger capacities coming down, like you said, 50%, we also hear from operators that the cost of doing business has gone up. In fact, some stakeholders are now arguing that the government needs to look into subsidizing fuel prices in order to provide more relief for the sector. How likely do you think that is to happen?
In other jurisdictions where public transport is a main facilitator of economic activities, you'll find that most governments provide subsidies, even in normal circumstances, because public transport, for it to be reliable and sustainable, it has to keep moving. And you'll find that at times you'll find buses have got to move even without passengers. So other governments in developed world, you'll find that they provide subsidies to public transport operators. In our case, it's not been making profit. It is a service that we've been doing, and people don't do proper cost accounting for them to be able to know whether they are doing a viable business. So there are many factors that actually has contributed heavily into big-time losses in public transport, and we don't see how we just hear about stimulus and maybe provision of what would actually make us stay afloat. But in this particular case, if today we were left to remain this way, sooner or later, or sooner than later, you'll not be able to have public transport privately owned operating, because it becomes uneconomical to operate. We are operating, we are making losses. We are not making profits. So when you do a business, you expect returns. When you invest, you expect returns. But right now, we are not even seeing none. We're seeing nothing at all. We are eating into our investment. We cannot be able to maintain these vehicles to be reliable, and we are unable to meet the operational costs. Somebody would argue now that the operational cost has come down because there's no much movement. Without movement, we can't be able to realize, even the costing or the costs that are involved in, operating in the small way that would have come in place. So right now, the public transport business is on its knees.
Well, what sort of relief and assistance are you hoping to see from the government?
Well, I think what we would recommend now is that government should now zero rate on taxes on fuel, despite the fact that now it is a low consumption of fuel. We should also be given waivers on parking fees. Like, for instance, the county of Nairobi would want to have monies from us without knowing whether you're doing business or not. And the other one is about licensing. In other countries where a service is provided, we are not supposed to be paying for licenses. But you'll find that public transport is overloaded with various taxes that are required for us to pay before operating. So now, and also the government should either provide subsidies, which will enable this important industry, to stay afloat. So there are various things that needs to be done. We also pay taxes, and it's only that this was the only industry that people pay advance taxes before you do business. And I believe that if the government really are interested in ensuring that we stay afloat, is by removing all this and probably providing support on the same, because the government it's its responsibility to make sure that there are movements, because these movements translate itself to economic activities. If today there are no movements, the government will not be able to collect taxes, because people going to industries will not get to their places of work, and the people going even to their jobs anywhere will not be able to get there, because 90% of Kenyans rely on public transport to get to various destinations.
Now, Mr. Kimutai, you said remaining in the sector has become unreasonable and untenable going forward. But we are seeing restrictions eased across several sectors going forward. Is there light at the end of the tunnel? What is your outlook for the sector given the easing of those restrictions?
Well, you see, what happens is people in Nairobi are the same number since Nairobi was put under lockdown, and other cities were done the same. For instance, Nairobi is normally what propels what can come in any other town in Kenya. And with the ease of restrictions, you'll find that the time extended, like for instance on curfew, it doesn't increase the number of movements. We still have the number of movements of the same people. And then this, most people ran away from Nairobi earlier on. And, they placed economically, people don't have money in their pockets. They can't travel. They've restricted, even those who want to travel have restricted their, traveling. So this impacts, we had provided adequate transport facilities for every Kenyan when there was normalcy. The new normal now, I think, is not in any favor on movements. So I know we will not be able to see, we'll go back to the normal, the old normal. Right now, we have to brace to adjust ourselves to be able to do the business the way it is now, since unless the government would step in and provide the stimulus. So now, whatever changes that would come in, like easing restrictions, we are not feeling the impact at all because the same people were moving. We hope that there will be open up, and though we fear that removing the lockdown might help spread COVID-19, and we don't want COVID-19, and we don't want to be the agents of spread, because public transport is a place where people converge, especially when they want to travel. So it's an essential service that everybody uses, and this is an area where people meet. So it can be easily. It can be an agent of transmission or spread of COVID-19. Somehow we would say that I believe that if there was opening up of movement, it has to be, of course, with plan that probably can give us business but not kill us.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we're certainly watching what happens. Many thanks for joining us, and thank you for your insights, Mr. Kimutai. That was Simon Kimutai, is the chairman of Kenya's Matatu Owners Association. Well, let's stay in the transport sector and head to Egypt now. The country's airline EgyptAir is currently negotiating with the National Bank of Egypt and Bank Misr for a loan of about $185 million. The Egyptian national aviation carrier aims to pay external debt brought on by COVID-19 restrictions. It is the second loan EgyptAir is seeking after it secured nearly $123 million in funding from the government last month. Here's Adel El Mahoui with the details.
Since the COVID-19 pandemic began to spread, causing a freeze in its operations, EgyptAir took the decision to keep its workforce. While flights came to a halt in March, it wasn't until May that the state-owned flag carrier of Egypt decided to cut salaries, and that only affected a small portion of the staff.
EgyptAir has been extremely committed to supporting its staff by keeping them on the payroll. It didn't attempt to lay off anyone. It didn't cut salaries for most employees. It only cut 10% of higher management staff members, and whose number is not a lot. It's why it needs those loans to support its employees and fulfill its financial commitments. It's one of the very few companies in the Middle East to take that initiative.
That only saved about $1.2 million every month, which is not much when compared to its current $61 million running cost. In total, Egypt's national carrier has $985 million in debt, of which $800 million is foreign debt, because of its recent aircraft purchases and renovations.
EgyptAir has started to shift its fleet into cargo to export agricultural products to Europe. Because of the pandemic, Europe's agricultural production slowed down. The Egyptian market made use of that, which is now supporting EgyptAir to a little extent as markets begin to reopen.
Cargo only contributes 20% of EgyptAir revenue. To cover its $215 million of monthly revenue losses, it is now in negotiations with Egypt's two biggest banks, the National Bank and Bank Misr, for a $185 million loan. The terms have not been announced yet, but it won't be as favorable as the Finance Ministry's $123 million 0% loan, which the company will only begin paying when it reaches 80% operation.
The Aviation Ministry is still figuring out the regulations for flights resumption. There will be social distancing, for instance. That means they'll cancel bookings on middle seats. That's nearly 1/3 of the flight's capacity. That will affect revenues. The government is planning to subsidize fuel for the aviation sector.
Million passengers dropped this year. In reality, it could get
Reportedly probationary first officers doing an Airbus A380 type rating. The Dubai-based airline also plans to retire a large part of its fleet. The decision is due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which has brought the travel sector to a standstill. And South African state airline SA Express has escaped liquidation after a judge granted a 3-month delay. The decision now gives the South African government more time to clarify its plans for the domestic and regional carrier. SA Express was placed under provisional liquidation back in April. That is after its administrators said they could not secure funding for turnaround efforts. And Volkswagen has replaced Herbert Diess as chief executive of the automaker's core VW brand. The management reshuffle comes after weeks of squabbling between Volkswagen's powerful labor leaders and its managers. That's over the pace and scale of cost-cutting plans to free up resources for the company's radical shift towards electric cars. Now, Raif Brandsteiter, who is currently the chief operating officer for the VW brand, will replace Diess as CEO. And finally, a South Korean court has denied an arrest warrant request for the Samsung Air. The allegations against J.Y. Lee center around a 2015 merger of two Samsung affiliates, Chell Industries and Samsung C&T. Now, Lee is accused of using the merger as a loophole to obtain greater control of the group. However, the world's top smartphone and memory chip maker has denied those allegations. And that is a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we are taking a short break now, still coming up on the show. President Cyril Ramaphosa is confident South African state entities could return to their former glory. And Uganda's tourism sector faces a gloomy future amid the COVID-19 pandemic.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business, only on CGTN.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Now, the ongoing coronavirus crisis has presented South Africa with opportunities to reform its state-owned enterprises. For years, companies such as South African Airways and Eskom have depended heavily on state bailouts in order to stay afloat. However, President Cyril Ramaphosa says COVID-19 is going to give Africa's most industrialized economy the capability to reset its ailing entities. From Johannesburg, here's Angelo Coppola.
President Ramaphosa went so far as to say that the pandemic gives South Africa greater capacity to reset or even repurpose the state-owned entities.
What COVID-19 has done in many countries around the world has provided companies with an opportunity in terms of a shift in terms of global dynamics, but also a shift in terms of consumer behavior. It provides a space and opportunity for executives, for management in the company to be able to look at the business model and perhaps reimagine it.
The government says it's committed to ensuring that no more jobs are lost. They also reiterated their support for state-owned entities like South African Airways.
Now, my interest is that SAA must be rescued. Now, the rescuing is finding a challenge. I'm talking my interest not personally as government, but the other mechanisms of saving SAA from what it is, it saves jobs. So as government, we've been dealing with that particular matter.
Besides finding the funds for state-owned entities in a really tough financial situation, the government has other social obligations.
At the same time, we've got an added responsibility in terms of the commitments of government, like a 350 Rand unemployment grant, which is brilliant, but unfortunately has a massive impact in terms of the government fiscus.
The COVID-19 crisis is seen by some as an opportunity to reevaluate the viability of many state-owned entities in South Africa.
It's very hard to innovate large state-owned companies, but often a crisis like the one we find ourselves in provide us with no other option but to be able to look at how can we do things differently. Because in the absence of doing things differently, you run the risk of a continued hemorrhaging from a balance sheet perspective. And eventually you get into a state where it's hard to be able to continue to sustainably run a state-owned company.
With around 700 SOEs in play at the moment, the government doesn't have the resources to fund them all or to rescue them all. They have to make some hard choices. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, let's head to Uganda now, where tour operators are worried about the impact of COVID-19, and they are worried that it could edge them out of their business. They say the pandemic is keeping visitors away from the country's tourist attractions, and now they're uncertain when their businesses will resume. Here's CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga reporting.
Amos Wekesa is a tour operator in Uganda. He says his business has slowed down due to COVID-19.
At least 80 of my staff have gotten letters to go on forced leave, really. And it's sad, it's not their problem, but again, you can't be spending when you're not earning. So we stopped earning in February as a business.
The Uganda government has also imposed flight restrictions. Traveling to border districts is not allowed. Curfew and lodges are still closed for at least a month. This is affecting the tourism industry.
Hotel bookings have just dropped off like a cliff, like dropping off a cliff. Air travel has dropped considerably. So we expect revenues to drop, but our costs are still high.
Tour operators are now pushing for a stimulus package from the government. And the government has responded positively.
Allow corporations, including small and medium-sized enterprises, to delay payment of corporation tax or presumptive tax for taxes due between April and June 20, and for tourism, manufacturing, horticulture and floriculture to defer until September 2020.
The Uganda government earned $2 billion in tourism revenue in 2017, up from $1.7 billion in 2016. But with the outbreak of COVID-19, they are uncertain about meeting their targets. Local authorities believe the country could lose $1.6 billion in tourism earnings after the pandemic. The International Monetary Fund has also projected that Uganda's tourism earnings could fall by 54% in the 2019-2020 fiscal year. Tour operators believe that a stimulus package from government will help the industry recover. But with many countries opening up and airlines beginning to fly, they hope for a quicker return to business towards the end of the year. Hilary Ayesiga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
And in Algeria, thousands are struggling to make ends meet amidst the country's COVID-19 lockdown. Well, CGTN's Mohamed Abubakar explores how precautionary measures taken so far are exacting a harsh toll on what was an already feeble economy.
Amidst government-imposed restrictions to face up to COVID-19, thousands of Algerians are being threatened as their sources of income vanish and workplaces close.
If things continue this way, we won't even find the money to eat. We are working on our own. We used to have an assistant, but I had to let him go.
Omar had to let go of his assistant when the government-imposed lockdown came into effect in March. The 53-year-old has also accumulated debt from having to cover his workshop's rent. But even now, as authorities in the North African nation gradually allow economic activities to resume, the likes of Omar continue to struggle.
We want the state to help us pay our bills because we are not working at the moment.
The virus is a problem for everyone. People's health is a priority, but so are people's salaries. We want them, the authorities, to help us with taxes, at least because it's only going to get worse if the lockdown continues.
Although Algeria has given extensions on tax payments for some businesses, for many it's still not enough.
This lockdown has completely ruined us. It's been 3 months since our shops closed and we haven't been working. We can't even find money to feed our children. The government has to find a solution for us to help us cut our losses.
So far, the country has confirmed over 10,000 coronavirus cases. More than 700 people have also died from COVID-19 related conditions. Mohamed Abubakar, CGTN.
You are watching Global Business Africa. We're about to take a short break, but still coming up on the show. Hong Kong's flag carrier, Cathay Pacific, avoids a collapse with a $5 billion government-backed plan. And up to 400,000 New Yorkers return to work after nearly 3 months of a lockdown.
Holding guns. Machine guns from police forces towards the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time? Not at all.
What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Now here's a recap of today's top headlines this hour. Burundi's President Pierre Nkurunziza has died of a suspected heart attack at the age of 55. He passed away at the Karusi 50th Anniversary Hospital on the 8th of June. Now, Nkurunziza has been in power since 2005. He was due to be replaced by Evariste Ndayishimiye, who won the country's presidential election conducted in May this year. And in Nigeria, health officials say almost 60% of mystery deaths reported in Kano State are linked to the coronavirus pandemic. A total of 979 people have died recently in 8 municipal local government areas. Now, authorities are now saying the cause of the sudden spike may have been triggered by COVID-19 in the face of pre-existing conditions in the patients. And Africa has recorded more than 195,000 coronavirus cases, with more than 86,000 recoveries. The continent continues to record the lowest death toll globally, currently standing at just over 5,300. And that's a recap of today's top headlines this hour. And on to international news now. Hong Kong airline Cathay Pacific has announced a $5 billion bailout plan in response to a major downturn which was caused by the pandemic. Now, the airline made the sweeping proposal to inject liquidity and stay afloat with the help of the government, which of course has now has a small stake in the firm. Cathay Pacific has been struggling after last year's widespread protest in Hong Kong. It has seen a further drop in passenger count due to the pandemic.
As we all know, the operating environment of aviation industry worldwide has been hard hit by the COVID-19 pandemic, leading to a near halt in passenger flights and causing serious impact to air cargo business. As Hong Kong's most important local airline, and the key driver of Hong Kong's aviation development, Cathay Group is also facing unprecedented operational and financial pressure. If this challenge is not properly addressed, it would harm Hong Kong's international aviation hub status and adversely impact on other economic activities to the detriment of the overall interest of Hong Kong.
Meanwhile, airports in France closed during the coronavirus pandemic are now reopening. That is as the country continues to ease restrictions put in place to control the novel virus. However, as CGTN's Ross Cullen reports, airports that will normally handle over 200 flights a day are now running with only 2.
Cleared for takeoff. The first commercial flight out of Nantes Airport since the end of lockdown. The airport is seen as the gateway to this coastal region. It had a successful 2019, with passenger traffic up 17% on the year before. Then the coronavirus pandemic struck.
Les vols commerciaux avaient été interrompus.
Commercial flights were stopped, so this sector was greatly impacted by the pandemic, and some staff were furloughed. We maintained some activities like cargo flights for medical equipment, plus transferring patients and healthcare workers.
The airports put in place a Protect Each Other campaign with hand sanitisers, regular deep cleaning in the terminal and social distancing measures. This first day after reopening saw a skeleton schedule, just 1 flight in and 1 flight out.
My daughter is living with her father and she comes to visit me in the holidays, but she couldn't come in February or April. So as soon as we could book tickets, she jumped on the plane. I haven't seen her for 6 months. It's been so long.
La liaison Lyon-Nantes.
The journey from Lyon to Nantes is an 8-hour drive compared to 1 hour by plane. So without a flight, it's almost impossible to organise a trip like for a meeting that's going to last a couple of hours.
I was supposed to come visit my family in March, but it was cancelled. So I've been waiting for this for so long. Coming by car was not possible, so I'm very happy to fly at last.
Regional airports across France were severely impacted by the lockdown. Here in Nantes, in the west of the country, there was a 90% drop in normal activity. But even when the pandemic has passed, things may not return to how they were before. Some areas in France have lots of smaller airports not far apart that could be closed or consolidated. But residents have an attachment to their local airport, and politicians have an interest in keeping the runways open.
Each politically head of the region just want to keep its airport alive, even if it costs money. It just gives money to the airport to be there, and you know that, for example, Ryanair also managed to have money from the local politicians in France just to keep having those lines on those non-economically viable airports.
European travel restrictions are still in place, so regional airports are hoping the French public will give them a boost and stay inside the country for their summer holidays. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Nantes, Western France.
Now, after being locked down for nearly 3 months now due to the coronavirus, New York City has just begun phase 1 of its 4-part reopening. Up to 400,000 New Yorkers are expected to return to work this week. Here's CGTN's Karina Huber with the story.
On the 100th day since the first case of the coronavirus hit New York State, New York City started phase 1, 1,000 confirmed and probable COVID-19 deaths in New York City. The partial reopening comes after the city hit several indicators, including a dramatic drop in new infections and deaths. At one point, it recorded 0 COVID-19 deaths in a 24-hour period.
Why are we reopening? Because these numbers say we can. It's no guess, there's no ideology. Based on the numbers, we can reopen.
400,000 New Yorkers are expected to return to work this week, many of them in construction. MTA officials say the city's subway service will be back up and running at 95% pre-pandemic levels. Manufacturing businesses can return, as can retailers with limitations.
I'm so excited, yay, we're back in business, yay!
But that's not the case for all retailers.
The retail industry in New York City was particularly hard hit by the COVID-19 outbreak. Retailers can now offer curbside service, but the problem for smaller shops is they don't have an online presence, making it hard for customers to know what's available to buy.
This mom-and-pop shop in Manhattan set up an outdoor stand to try and attract local business.
It's been tough. You know, you don't have the business coming in. You know, it's been tough, and, you know, just saying, it's not inexpensive to pay rent in New York City.
To survive, the store needs to get back up and running as quickly as possible. One customer will be allowed to enter the store at a time, so long as they wear a face covering and maintain social distance.
It's like any way that I can get you really in is what it's all about.
They were successful with this reporter making their first sale since reopening. It could be a while, though, before retailers can open their doors more widely. Phase 2 of the city's reopening plan won't likely begin for another 2 weeks.
Good to see you, all right?
Karina Huber, CGTN, New York.
Now, Chinese tech giant Huawei says it is committed to working on Great Britain's 5G network. The British government allowed the company to play a limited role in the construction, but some politicians want to scale it back even further. And that, of course, is because of security concerns. While CGTN's Nawid Jabrakil reports from London.
Huawei is fighting back. The Chinese tech giant has bought full-page adverts in most of the UK's major newspapers in an attempt to speak to the British public. The company's faced criticism over its involvement in 5G technology in the country, something its vice president here in the UK says doesn't make sense.
Because of some of the confusion that has been put into the press, we feel it's really important that we state our case. And our case is that we're a privately owned company owned by 90,000 of its employees, and we're independent of the Chinese state.
In January, the UK government allowed Huawei to play a limited role in its 5G networks, but labelled it a high-risk vendor. That means it can only take part in non-core infrastructure, which is less sensitive, and have a maximum market share of 35%. Since then, there's been growing pressure from some lawmakers in the UK for that decision to be reversed, a view that's found common cause on the other side of the Atlantic.
Britain can join the United States and other powerful free nations and work together on a 5G solution that doesn't empower Chinese intelligence. I'm greatly encouraged by reports indicating that your government intends to help lead efforts to develop alternatives to Huawei among the world's democracies.
President Trump wants an outright ban on the firm and says the UK's decision could jeopardise intelligence sharing. The US, Australia and New Zealand have already banned Huawei, with other European countries watching developments closely.
The fundamental criticism is that Huawei doesn't have operational independence from the Chinese government in Beijing. How does a successful multinational Chinese company manage to separate itself from the government in Beijing?
About 50% of our revenues come from outside China. And so we abide by the laws and regulations in 170 countries worldwide.
And to clarify the fundamental point again, Huawei doesn't and will not hand over sensitive data to the Chinese government or be used for spying on behalf of the Chinese government.
You know, we've stated that many, many times. Our business would collapse overnight if we were even to contemplate that, which we don't. And we've never been asked to hand over data by the Chinese government.
Boris Johnson and his government face a difficult dilemma. On the one hand, members of his ruling Conservative Party are gathering support with their anti-Huawei message. On the other hand, they face the stark reality that China remains an important trading partner and that Huawei has some of the world's most advanced and cheapest 5G technology. Turning away from that could set back British businesses and consumers.
Analysts say a full ban on Huawei could cost the industry almost $2 billion and set the rollout of 5G back by 2 years. For now, the government is staying tight-lipped on the issue, and Huawei says it's focused on its future work in the UK, despite the growing pressure. Uche Okoronkwo, CGTN, London.
Now, major beer producers such as Heineken, Asahi and Anheuser-Busch are all said to be preparing for deliveries to UK pubs soon. Pubs in Britain are not due to reopen until later this month at the earliest, but some people have found a way to sneak a cold pint from takeaway counters and pop-up stalls. Juliet Mann reports.
Days like this were made for that great British institution, the pub. Alas, in lockdown, 47,000 drinking establishments in Britain closed their doors overnight. But resourceful landlords are tapping into what their customers want.
You miss this so much. Now, there's some of us who do miss it so much. And also, it's made everybody around here happy.
We could sit at home and drink, but it's not the same as drinking in a pub.
It's just nice to have a slice of normality back.
Just love having a cold pint in the sun.
The pandemic has hit the beer and pub sector hard, an industry already grappling shifting consumer habits, tax rises and wage increases. Desperate to stem the losses of lockdown, some switched from being pubs to hubs, providing vital services to their neighbourhoods.
Not a pub anymore, it's a corner shop. Takeaway drinks, takeaway food, serving the local community. Well, we don't see as a future. We hope to get back to normal, to be honest, because the UK is all about a great British pub.
But getting back to normal will mean adapting the business model.
This section of the pub is currently closed, but the owner's already thinking about what changes they'll need to make when the pubs can reopen. They're looking at the layout, maybe introducing more table service and reducing time spent propping up the bar.
But downsizing capacity could give some pubs a hangover they won't recover from.
The pub is the original social network. It's where we go to connect with our friends. And so it does provide significant challenges when it comes to social distancing. At the moment in the UK, we have 2 metre social distancing, and that would only bring into play about 30% of pubs in the United Kingdom. If that was reduced to the WHO standard of 1 metre, though, you're opening up 75%. We have done a survey of our members and 40% said they would not be able to survive till September. That is a stark statistic, and we need to make sure we can find a pathway to open our pubs so that we don't lose those pubs forever.
The UK government says it's going as fast as it can to reopen the industry, but more might go al fresco to avoid calling last orders too soon.
Cheers. All the best, darling. Yeah, chutney cab.
And on that note, let's take a look at commodity markets today. Oil prices were weighed down by a stronger dollar and, of course, oversupply concerns. Brent crude fell over 2% in early trading. It is clear now that they've been impacted by news that Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the UAE and Oman will be ending output cuts in July. But of course, there are also some concerns that recent signs of improving demand could prompt higher non-OPEC supply in the market. Meanwhile, gold prices edging higher today. They were boosted by a weaker dollar, but it's still traded in a narrow range as caution set in ahead of the U.S. Fed meeting. The recent interest in riskier assets could also add some pressure on the metal, but of course, the weaker U.S. dollar has lent it some support. Well, we are heading into a short break. Do stay with us. More stories coming up.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Now, strict measures to contain the spread of the coronavirus have now forced businesses to switch sides in Egypt. In March, the North African nation closed its cafes, which has cost small businesses their only source of income. To turn things around, some coffee shops have now started selling vegetables and fruits in order to keep their businesses afloat. CGTN's Shonela Lupuana has the story.
Businesses worldwide have been dented by the coronavirus pandemic, and in Egypt, the situation isn't any different. Cafes have changed their dynamics, though, by venturing into the sale of produce to boost their source of income.
What made me think of this idea is that all of us have children and homes to feed. If we don't work, we will not be able to eat in these times. The coronavirus has ruined the country, not just for us. All coffee shops have closed and 90% of us won't open again. I have to think of something to feed myself and my children.
I was a cafe worker, serving hookah, tea, and coffee. And all of a sudden, I found myself selling tomatoes, cucumbers, and peppers to women. Of course, we used to get a lot of mockery at the beginning. But people are now encouraging us. Some say, "How are you working selling vegetables? You are a cafe worker. This is not your field, but this is better than selling coffee at this time." They are both means of making a living. It is better than sitting at home.
Most business owners have been faced with the probability of shutting down amid the ongoing pandemic.
We were okay and making money. Everything was going well. All of a sudden, we found ourselves from one situation to another. Workers who went home with 100 Egyptian pounds can't find 10 Egyptian pounds to go home with. A shop owner who used to go home with 500 Egyptian pounds can't find 50 Egyptian pounds to go home with. Even the 50 Egyptian pounds isn't there anymore. What will we do today? So we had to start any project, even though there are still difficulties and losses because we've never worked in this industry before.
Despite government efforts to impose strict measures, the country has experienced a surge in daily registered cases. Currently, Egypt has more than 35,000 confirmed coronavirus cases, as well as nearly 1,300 related deaths. Shonela Lupuana, CGTN.
Now, of course, there have been many unusual results of the coronavirus pandemic. Nigeria, for example, is currently experiencing a shortage in the supply of smartphones and accessories. Smartphone shipments to Africa's biggest economy have declined by 15.4% in the first quarter of this year. A further decline of 3.9% is projected by the second quarter. Here's CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam with the details.
Prince Johnson has spent the past 7 years building his mobile phones and accessories business in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. He imports products mainly from China and Dubai, but shipments have stalled since the coronavirus outbreak. This in spite of rising demands.
It's been very difficult to get goods, even though sometimes when you make order from China, from Hong Kong, from Dubai, to receive it will become a problem. Most people receive their goods from for Mina right now, but before we can get goods in 2 days, 3 days. You make order between 3 days, 3 days. You leave China, you get it in Nigeria. But now 2 weeks plus before you can be able to have access to it. Most customers will be calling for products, but there's no product to sell to them. Trade the transaction. Some customers call for a particular thing we don't have. If you give them option the one you have, this is not actually what they want.
Statistics from the International Data Corporation show over 15% fall in smartphone shipments. Consumers are now feeling the impact of this shortage as products are either unavailable or more expensive.
I came here to change my phone screen. I came at first, they said they were low on stock. They had to just fix one for me. And on getting home, I said that this has an issue. I had to come back again to check if they now have a new supply. But they said due to COVID-19, they've not received their new stock. So I still have to come back again. So it's really not been easy at all, getting accessories, phones and everything. And prices have really shot up due to COVID-19.
Nigeria relies on importation to serve its growing mobile gadgets community. Smartphone imports stood at 2.9 million units in the fourth quarter of 2019, making Nigeria the leading African market with the highest number of smartphone imports. About 85% of phones and accessories are imported from China, and many here worry that the situation may be exacerbated by the falling local currency and inflationary pressures. Kelechi Mekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Well, before we go, here's a quick look at Africa's currencies today. Kenya's shilling edged down. Traders saw an uptick in demand for dollars by some importers in the country. They say it could be pent-up demand from businesses who have been waiting for the currency to strengthen. Meanwhile, South Africa's rand weakening today against the US dollar. It traded at around 16.7 rand per dollar, retreating from a near 12-week high. With no significant data due locally except on maybe on Thursday, the focus is now on, of course, that US Fed meeting. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.